Kia ora koutou, nā mai haere mai, and welcome to this panel on notions of community and the digital in the context of Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm David Ciccoricco, and I'm speaking to you from Ōtepoti, Dunedin, and the University of Otago. More specifically, this is all in the context of ADA, the Aotearoa Digital Arts Network. So this grew out of a digital artist in residence at the University of Waikato, founded in 2002 and has since been the only national organization dedicated to the promotion and preservation of digital arts in New Zealand. So chairing this panel, in fact, has extra significance for me as part of a broader effort to bring creative media and digital literary arts into closer dialogue with DH methods and critique. So I followed and admired the endeavor of ADA for the last 15 years or so. So I'm really happy to see this come together. As far as I see it, let this be year one for a continuing and regular inclusion of ADA that can creatively ally itself and mutually inform the digital humanities movement in New Zealand. It is now my pleasure to introduce the first speaker for the panel. Birgit Bachler is a media artist, designer, and researcher based in Te Whanganui-a-Aotearoa, Wellington. She investigates emergent media and the ways that contemporary technologies continuously create, shape, and manipulate networks between humans and non-humans, electronic data, and their environments. Today, she will discuss creative practice at the intersection of electronic arts and media technologies in the light of climate crisis. Please welcome Birgit.
Hello, thank you, David. Gonna try share my screen and start. Excellent. Kia ora koutou. I hope you can see the NASA image of the day in front of you right now. With this image, I wanted to talk about how I came to New Zealand in first place. As you notice my accent, I'm born in Austria originally and studied in the Netherlands before coming to Aotearoa. I wanted to introduce in this talk how my move to Aotearoa changed the way I approach creative practice and the role that the ADA network played for me to set foot as a creative practitioner in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm gonna talk a little bit about some artworks that I developed here in Aotearoa and presented also at Art Symposia, and were in collaboration with ADA people and ADA folk, and how this work played a part in me slowly unlearning my Eurocentric way of thinking about networks and the art of connection. So I thought it would be interesting also for my own kind of looking back, how I kind of landed in New Zealand with this post done by Helen Varley-Jameson. So the ADA network primarily historically is footed in a traditional mailing list. And so I was also part of the FACES mailing list, which is a feminist art technology mailing list. It's mainly kind of situated around Europe and North America, I suppose, where I asked that I was moving to New Zealand and asking people what was going on, if someone could help me. And my introduction to ADA in that sense was that Helen picked up my post and immediately forwarded it to the Aotearoa Digital Arts Network list and connected me with people, which is kind of like a good way of understanding how the ADA network for me works. Like, it is a very abstract digital mailing list, but meeting people in the real world who are connected through those kind of more abstract digital networks really helps foster connection and community in first place. So Helen kind of introduced me to the network list, and immediately I felt kind of welcomed into the kind of media arts, creative technology scene that was present. And as David kind of introduced, I wanted to talk a little bit about the issues with digital art and media art in kind of in the face of climate crisis. And I thought to just feature one of those photos I found of the Datacom data center in Christchurch. just reminding us that even though lots of us call us kind of digital or media practitioners, and lots of our art and lots of our connection on those mailing lists kind of seems to be happening solely in the digital spaces. Just as a reminder, those digital spaces are like manifested in the material world in the form of data centers, cables that like require power, probably fueled by fossil fuel and coal and all those kind of things that we often seem to overlook. And those kind of networks or those kind of ideas behind how things actually connect from us as practitioners, as communities between humans, always interested me, but also how these kind of connections fan out into the modern human world, into our like planetary realities. So I wanted to just show one of the first pieces that I developed in response coming to New Zealand. It was a development of a piece that I first created in Europe. So I was interested in kind of building an autonomous messaging network. I'm really interested by the fact how you can build communities and networks without relying on the major players such as Facebook or Google or Instagram or any of the kind of online networks. And I was always quite interested in how to make use of the technology without being reliant on a central node and a central player. So this was a work called Dialogue, and the way it worked is you can see there's like a local Wi-Fi network that people can connect to. So it only works within kind of 100 meter plus minus of the Wi-Fi router that I installed in Focal Street that was in Dunedin. And so people could only connect to that Wi-Fi router, and I was like handing out these stickers with a unique code. And so people could place those stickers around Focal Street, and only people who like were connected to that network would be prompted to a site. And given that code, they could kind of leave secret messages for each other in the space. So I was quite interested in creating networks that make use of all digital technology, like, you know, using a smartphone, using kind of, the technology at hand, like Wi-Fi, but kind of bringing it back into the spaces where it, creates kind of this tension between autonomous networks that are not reliant on like a central server. No one is watching, no surveillance whatsoever. So it was kind of like almost like a small community performance of people walking around that area, hiding those stickers and sending messages. And no one, not even me as the network host, would know who wrote it and what kind of messages people would leave for each other in those spaces. Another work that followed later on was kind of stemming from an interest in data and open data in general. And those were like 6 art prints that I created based on open data sets that I found online. On the left, you can see a data set from a PowerShell counting from sizes and represented in a wallpaper. There's internet speed, there's the distance from New Zealand to every single nuclear power plant in the world. There's like criminal terrorist entities, there's an earthquake data set and the tidal data set. So I was trying to use data sets that were relating to New Zealand and then reinterpreting the data through like a software called processing to create kind of nice wallpapers from it, so that the actual kind of the patterns would kind of mean more than just being aesthetically pleasing, but they would also tell a story of the land, of the kind of modern human world again, if you would say. And this interest kind of went further the more I understood that the way European-born, European-thought people kind of are presented with abstract data and with the environment, that there's actually so much more to learn from Te Ao Māori. So living in Wellington, I realized that historical Wellington was hugely different before colonization, before urbanization. And I got really interested into the streams, in the local streams of Wellington. And so I created like different kind of data sets and tried to like find those streams, because they're all buried underground. They've been all channeled and piped, and we can't see them. You can see them maybe through like stormwater drains. This would be a hint that there's a stream while you go over the street, that there might be water running from the source to the sea. Sometimes there would be like those kind of signs people would be, or like the council would like make some big diggings, and they would kind of mark where the streams would be running or which pipes carry like stormwater. So I was really interested in those suddenly hidden narratives that were kind of unknown to people who even lived in Wellington for a long time. And so I discovered through my engagement with streams and fresh water, and also engaging with Mātauranga Māori more as a foreigner, being confronted with the kind of frictions that all and the tensions that are present within, like in modern day Aotearoa. And so I was starting to develop different methods to work with those tensions. And one of them I would describe as openness. What was really important in my research was also slowness. And the third one that played a vital part in the way I created my designs or my artworks were seamfulness. And I just want to show you kind of the messy reality of the work of a creative technologist. So I was like conducting lots of walks, trying to understand above from kind of those maps that I created, being actually in the field and understanding what is the stream doing, what is the stream actually there to say, what remains, how can we kind of reconnect the stream to the urban fabric. And then going back into my electronics lab and working with like Internet of Things technology to kind of reconnect or use digital technology in that sense to reconnect humans with the kind of material reality of the streams, which are unfortunately really polluted because they are not in any way protected, and there's still like native species present in the streams. So I learned quite a lot in my practice, found out quite a lot into like ecology and biology even. And it became quite hard to see my role as a creative technologist working in those spaces that were already so troubled by technology and by colonization, specifically by kind of European development. So I started to slow down and realize that, you know, my kind of known ways, my learned ways kind of had to be unlearned. And how do you create creative technology, you know, that use a lot of energy, that is of lots of materials and resources? How does that together work together with an environment like New Zealand? And so I developed some of those approaches by like really not trying to not like buy new resources and recycle and upcycle as many resources as possible. So I ended up building sensors that are housed in like used pickle jars. And as you can see, that kind of these kind of pickle jars were used first for carrying my lunch to work, and then I would sometimes use them to collect stream water from the stream site, or using that to like house some of my electronics. So I just really, through being here in Aotearoa and working with the people that I got to know through the network, because there were a couple of people involved in the iterative design approach during sharing time at the stream and discussing what is our impact on those kind of environments, were very valuable conversation. And I think what mostly came out of that research I did with water and that did with technology, for me, it came out that urban development as a result of colonization has done a lot of damage to urban land and water in Wellington. And so I tried to bring people and water together in a new space through design to create a space in which the water has the opportunity to make itself known through electronic signals. So I think as creative technologists, we have to be careful to include existing networks and ecologies in our work, and be careful that the technologies we develop don't override like pre-existing or networks, or we do not further reinforce prevailing inequalities that technology has historically created. So I would suggest that we take the time to deal with existing environment for which we're designing, to be open to listening to signals from nature and the environment, to also openly keep sharing our ideas with affected communities. And in a way, this is where a community like Aotearoa Digital Arts Network really helps connecting to practitioners who are interested in arts, who are interested in the digital, but also share the concerns around, you know, making Aotearoa a more equitable space. And also not to be afraid to experiment with seamfulness in order to create new innovative works that are modifiable and accessible. And I just want to also show at the end of my presentation a piece that one of my students created as a kind of signal of hope, because it's Sabrina Lawson's work called Reflect. So they were really interested in making a piece that would be kind of, it was initially built as a projection work, but then we discussed how projections in nature would kind of, be not only impractical, but also like requiring energy and further resources. So in the end, they decided to build a kind of installation work that has this mirror and the little motor, and it is being driven by solar power. So the work is only working when the sun has charged the battery enough. And so there was a lot of work went into like creating a work that is heavily using on recycled materials, and it does the least possible damage to the environment while also being responsive to the environment and kind of reflecting the environment itself and becoming part of the environment. And I want to close with with our upcoming event, Indeterminate Infrastructures, which was planned as a one-day symposium in Wellington. But we decided for with the current COVID situation to move the symposium online, like this conference. And these are kind of just regular events that where aaDH practitioners kind of mingle and meet. And so we invite everyone who's here, maybe coming next Saturday or checking our new website out, because we will have lots of new material as part of the symposium. Yeah, I think that's me. Thank you.
And thank you so much for that. I've several questions and so many connections that I want to make. Some of those connections are to people I know who are in the Zoom audience. Speaking of questions, it's a fairly small and manageable group, so we'll probably be able to just use the hand raise function after all of the speakers are done. We'll have the Q&A, but if you need to type your question into the chat, I'll do my very best to follow it up there as well. It's time to introduce our second speaker, Vicki Smith, who makes artworks that navigate the permeability between visual and virtual, weaving science, the environment, and traditional practices into individual work and collaboration. She develops projects that enhance collaborative communities of practice and engage creative ways to encourage the care and protection of our environment. Today, she takes us into the back catalog of aaDH. Please welcome Vicki.
Hi, I'm just gonna share my screen with you, and I can, I had it right there, sorry, here it is. Okay, so actually I'm not talking about my work specifically, but I'm talking about aaDH as a network. For me, when aaDH first started up was when I moved back to actually where I am situated now, which is Harihari on the West Coast. And aaDH became virtually a vital link for me back into the arts community that I was familiar with. People that I didn't need to describe what I meant by every second word. So I've elected after our discussion as a board to be the one that talks about aaDH itself as a network and as a community. So I'd just like to, I'm going to read. So Karu Makua in 2008 described aaDH as a web of sites, saying the Aotearoa Digital Arts List brings together people who may be separated by distance and time zones. Participants in this self-selected community are imaginatively and connected primarily through an identification with Aotearoa, New Zealand, as one of their sites of belonging. And that essay can be read in the aaDH Media Reader that I'll mention soon. So I'm just going to begin with, this is a lace making graphic, and this was used for the first aaDH gathering in 2003. As David mentioned, the network began as a list, and it was the first media residency in Waikato, which was hosted by Sean Cubitt and undertaken by Stella Brennan. And the Waikato University was the first internet gateway into New Zealand. And this event was the first gathering of interested individuals who would go on to form the aaDH network. So the list itself was seen as establishing the weft and the crafting of the community that has since delivered many artworks, masterclasses, and symposia. The first symposium in terms of a 3-day, lots of people gathering was in Dunedin. members of AIDA emerged into this way of calling themselves digital artists and within the frame of new media art. The format was largely built around a survey of current projects and practitioners of digital art, and about 80 participants connected physically and performed and networked around the city itself, but also internationally. And this is some of those present enjoying the AIDA Open Sandwich, which is an open source food production and networking opportunity that has become a very famous part of AIDA events. So there was a few events around. AIDA has a history of moving from the North Island to the South Island and back again in terms of the events and symposia. And there were a few that happened that was AIDA kind of bursting onto the scene, and some consolidation within local networks and other networks that are around that are aligned but a slightly different space, and a strengthening also of international connections. And this book, the AIDA Media Reader, was produced for exhibition as part of Cloudlands and launched at ICEA in Singapore in 2008. So this was a publication that became a kind of a screenshot of contemporary practice by New Zealand digital artists and those artists in New Zealand. Hard copies have been distributed far and wide. I hope that you all may have seen one, or that you would have one in your library. And the articles themselves are all available for download on the AIDA website. Post that, there was a couple of years where again AIDA looked more locally, tending to networks and thinking about the ideas of energy and materiality. And AIDA again worked on drawing together local communities in different venues nationally and providing windows into national practice with visiting artists and masterclasses. And through those configurations, we get to March 2010, when AIDA as a network participated in a global festival called Electro Smog. And around New Zealand, we organised events and commissioned artworks to engage with the issue of remoteness. So Aotearoa is often considered at the end of the world. One of the works that were commissioned was called the Korowiki, and it was a kete of remote art, was the tagline. And it's a catalogue of projects around Aotearoa, New Zealand, that use communication technologies to present, perform, and collaborate over time and distance. This formed the foundation of what we now call the AIDA Art Base, which you will also be able to see in a revamped form in the new website. And this was a vehicle for the contribution and distribution of digital artworks. So in that same year was a symposium in Whanganui in the North Island again, and this one was called Energetics and Informatics. It was by now number 7, and the invited keynotes were Douglas Kahn, David Haynes, and Joyce Hinterding. The symposium started by examining the relationship between energy and information in media arts. And it began with a field day on the Whanganui River with local iwi and with scientists, and completely non-digital, but the symposium itself included a screening program and exhibitions. Douglas Kahn went on to do a masterclass which was distributed nationally, and it was anchored at that symposium and then travelled out to Christchurch and to Auckland and informally in sites between them. And so carrying on with this idea of walking was the next masterclass, which was with Simon Pope, who for the digital arts historians was one of the triumvirate who gave us the net stalker, the web stalker. And so he was looking at networking as a very broadband and shoulder-to-shoulder experience of walking and communicating around ideas. one of the walks that happened, this again was a national work by AIDA, and actually international because it also was in Wollongong in Australia, where one of the AIDA trustees was resident at the time. But I point this out because one of the walks here was following the perimeter of the fenced-off red zone post the earthquakes in 2010 and 2011 in Christchurch. And this walk and a roundtable helped focus the thinking in proposing the next few years of creative research for AIDA itself as a community. Some of you may have seen this. This is a photograph of the central city of Christchurch post the earthquakes, and the research project was called Mesh Cities. And it began with this roundtable discussion, which was a survey to look at the transitional through art, the creative response, and through the civic and social influence in the rebuilding of urban communities. So the first art work that was commissioned out of that one was a work called Neighbourhood Hope Index by Janine Randerson. And that was a masterclass workshop that happened in the 4 main centres. And participants were given a physical, meteorological way to express their feelings for the future city. And the next thing that was part of that year was the 2013 symposium, at which both Birgit and Ted had artworks in Vogel Street. And this had the tagline Space, Network and Memory. And folded within it were multiple works and papers that reflected digital approaches to the capturing of loss, both physically of buildings and of the urbanscapes of the city, but also uncovering the connecting layers of history and the process, both digital and through field trips, of reimagining pathways and connections in a future likely to be further ruptured by climate change. As always, AIDA provided avenues to showcase works in progress, and we're looking at here Kedron Parker, who is presenting her vision for her work, Kumu Total Stream. And this was the first purchase by Wellington City Council of a digital artwork, and is now enjoyed by thousands of Wellingtonians when they're passing under Lambton Quay. They follow the path of Kumu Total Stream. The next year, the work that AIDA assisted in terms of the masterclass was a project called Sound Sky. This is a geolocated work by Trudy Lane and US artist Halsey Bergend, who created this work to help provide a public interface and tool for accessing the increasing number of recordings that were gathered by organisations such as Seismic out of Canterbury University. The Sound Sky app created ways for locals and visitors to relocate within the city by listening to audio, and to also to locate themselves through sounds, through contributing memory, as well as voicing ideas of hope for the future. Another commission work that was a collaboration with Digital Art Live in Auckland was the DJ3D14, which was Dan Untitled's anaglyphic dreaming robot that formed part of the interactive screen in the Aotearoa Centre in Auckland. And this was also the opening event for the AIDA Symposium, which was in Auckland that year. We're coming through now to 2015, and the original application had sought to create a further series of masterclasses. Instead, we had to draw it in a little bit, and what we did was that over 5 days, 8 artists and writers took part in the production of the first scholarly imprint for the Christchurch Free Range Press, their scholarly imprint called Harvest. The work, A Transitional Imaginary, was created in digital form through book type, and the book sprint offered multiple views of the transitional from its physical and thematic base in central Christchurch. So this publication, which is now sold out, it looked at the response by the artists to the city and to the work that had been generated over the last 2 years, and also to from their own work and their own response. It included people that live and are based in Christchurch and were there through the earthquakes, people that are very familiar with Christchurch. Oh, I don't know. Sorry, there we go. Sorry about that. And also people that were completely new to the city, including someone who had done a virtual work for the 2013 symposium in Dunedin and a physical work for the 2014 symposium in Christchurch about walking. What followed was, the next year was the art base being revamped and seeking to capture more broadly the local and the digital. And 2 further projects, one of which will be expanded on by its co-curator, Ted Whitaker. And I should be able to, sorry, I'm going to go forward to the last slide. And as Birgit said, I just wanted to bring it back to the physical and the virtual. So these are actually lace making bobbins that a friend of mine let me to photograph. And just to say that next weekend there will be the virtual event. So I'd like to finish by suggesting that the AIDA's web of sites exists as a multiplicity of writings and works that fall within the amorphous bounds of digital or new media. That the connective tissue, the common unity, is of exploring the technical edgelands between multiple codes. The network is the provision of welcome, where participants such as the original AIDA herself have found a place to create new strands into the broad definition of digital arts. AIDA, the network, has been crafted over nearly 2 decades through the weaving of practitioners and researchers from interrelated disciplines, through the physical and distributed and toured works, masterclasses and symposia, reflecting changing cultural interests and critical national events. Now, after a brief hiatus and a collecting of energies again by the board, you will have the chance to intersect, interact and interrupt, being provided by the first virtual one-day symposium online next weekend and its 3-day counterpart in Whakatū, Nelson in September 2022. And for discussion, I would seek to consider the relevance of the network now with the ubiquity of digital. Is there still a space for this configuration, and how useful might AIDA be to you who are new to the community? And that's me.
Korowiki, thank you so much for that, and thanks for prompting a few questions, excellent questions, and that was a lovely overview of AIDA and its trajectory over the years. You didn't include it in your own presentation, but your work with Ciccoricco was featured yesterday in one of the talks sounding on whale ecologies.
Great.
It's time to move on to our third speaker, Ted Whitaker, an artist based in Te Whanganui-Aotearoa, Wellington. He graduated from the Dunedin School of Art with an MFA in 2016. He's had work displayed at exhibitions as far away as Beijing and as near as Ōtepoti, Dunedin. Ted will be talking about the 2017 project Storm Channels, co-facilitated by AIDA and the Anti-Room. Please welcome Ted.
Thank you, David. Just sharing some slides there. Is that coming through for everybody?
Not yet.
Sometimes it takes a minute, but try one more time to just share screen. And we got it.
Great. So yeah, as David mentioned, kia ora koutou, ko te Whitaker toko ingoa. I'm an artist based in Wellington, and like the rest of the panel, I'm a trustee of the Aotearoa Digital Arts Network. And so for this panel, I'm going to talk through a project that I co-facilitated with Charlotte Parallel in 2017 called Storm Channels. And with this project, it was a collaboration between AIDA and a local artist-run space called the Anteroom in Kopatai, Port Chalmers. But I guess firstly, I just wanted to kind of backpedal a bit and sort of, like Vicki's kind of already kind of given us really good depth of what AIDA's done in the past in terms of projects, but just how Storm Channel is situated within this. It was kind of, I guess, yeah, just thinking about how AIDA had interfaced in events in the past. So prior to Storm Channels, AIDA had a strong history with delivering high quality critical symposia and kind of lent into a largely academic audience and participation. And that like not always was like largely presented with university environments, or it was largely within universities and other institutions in a kind of more formal sense that equally attracted many working within those institutions. So in 2017, there was a sort of noticeable shift within the makeup of the AIDA Board of Trustees, being made up of less of university employees and more so practicing artists. But yeah, not only this makeup of the board, there was a sort of feeling and gesture for AIDA to kind of break away from this traditional symposia format, or at least for a moment, and to kind of be more art practice led and an exhibition approach into this event that's kind of celebrated the large network of artists working within digital technology and digital cultures. So yeah, bringing me back to Storm Channels, it was essentially a mini festival held in Ōtepoti, Dunedin, over 3 days across 6 different artist-run initiatives. And those who don't know, Dunedin has a really rich and interesting history of artist-run spaces, which kind of seemingly, my office phone, seemingly kind of has this endless cycle of artist-run spaces that are kind of popping up and disappearing. And that might be in the form of like a DIY venue or a gallery or a studio space. And it kind of has this sort of indeterminate lifespan and kind of, yeah, will exist at any given time. And yeah, it's always had a strong support structure and influence for me as an artist, and in particular when I was living in Dunedin. So yeah, in 2017, we identified 6 artist-run spaces that were operating at the time, all with different styles, approaches, agendas. And these include Nun Gallery, XXXYYY, the Manor Dirt Gallery, and Savoy de Lacy. And of course, the Anteroom, which is the only artist-run space out of that group that still remains today. Not with its own trials and tribulations, but it's still kicking. And so, yeah, Storm Channels was a way to kind of celebrate this creative chaos and through channeling the storm, so to speak, of independent art spaces with this sort of program of events, exhibitions, workshops, and performances to allow sort of a financial support to these working in the ARIs, but also kind of promote the magnitude that these ARIs hold within the creative community. Kind of, yeah, and so I felt it was a really important kaupapa for AIDA to be involved with, because it kind of brought together sort of a broad range of practitioners, people working with video, installation, sound, projection, and even sort of, there was a helium-powered drone which live cast the entire 3-day event, kind of float around between each space. And so all of this, kind of this ethos of DIY and skill sharing, yeah, I thought was a really strong connection from what AIDA has, from how Birgit mentioned the list, to yeah, how it operates in a kind of very physical DIY sense. So expanding on this concept, Storm Channels was bringing together and celebrating these ARIs in a city that, yeah, I guess sort of, yeah, acknowledges those sort of resources and knowledge sharing, but is often, you know, synonymous with online communities and digital arts practice. So whether it's engaging in an online forum, a tutorial, or in physical space, using old media, new media, it often requires a network of support. So quickly dive into a bit of more about the actual what happened during the event. So the invitation was sent out to these 6 different ARIs, and it was kind of simply just to host an event, one of a 6-part program that would kind of speak to the ideologies of each individual space, while given the opportunity and backing to try something that they hadn't done before or wouldn't otherwise do, if, at least if they had the means to do. So yeah, the kind of the 3-day turbo run through of the festival. It kind of started at Dirt Gallery, which was a central city space, and featured an immersive exhibition by Chong Win Ting. It was a multi-channel video sound work that documents an installation which they'd produced in an abandoned sake factory in Naka Nojo in Japan. And created by Ting, the practice kind of questions the relationships to ownership, everyday environments. And it was kind of, really special that while Ting couldn't attend, there was kind of like this great instructional and translation element of the work that could be physically realized in Dunedin. So after this opening event, the crowd...
Are you showing different slides? Because the screen isn't moving at the moment. I just want to double check.
Thanks, Maggie.
Yep.
Maybe the slideshows come to... Yeah, I've kind of just a note, I guess I've just got this slideshow on carousel, and it's just sort of not necessarily talking to the images that I'm verbalizing. So it's sort of an overall flavor. So yeah, it's a bit of a mashup of the storm channels and kind of from how maybe more how it felt for people who were caught up in the storm.
I think we see
it's
it
just static for us, Ted.
Oh, it's okay. So it hasn't moved this whole time?
No.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. So it was moving fine for me. Oh, all right.
It seems to be moving now.
Let's cycle back through. Reliable Adobe Acrobat. Just try something else.
Did you make sure to tick optimize for video streaming when you shared your screen?
How's that? Are you seeing anything now?
Yeah, just click on each of those thumbnails and we can see stuff, Ted.
Sweet, cool, thanks. I'll just do a quick catch up to some of the images and maybe talk to a few of them. So this is just sort of an overall map of the artist-run spaces that were featured in the 3-day event. So kind of sort of where I was up to, we're sort of at Dirt in this inner city gallery by the Octagon, and then we're moving out south towards Nun Gallery. Cool. Just for the reasons of time, perhaps I won't dive in so much into the actual makeup of each event, and just sort of breeze through a few of these images. So if those are familiar with Nun Gallery, this will be a familiar site. On the following day, the event moved to quite a grand, maybe 8-bedroom flat up again in the central city, and it was sort of part of a 2-part event, one for an afternoon close listening, and then following by an evening event, which was more of a kind of club-oriented sound audio video project. Then the following day, I think was the last day of the event, that was kind of centered at the ante room with a workshop on how to build your own magneti. So very much a hands-on skills sharing, soldering, making, doing. That's the artist there, Brett Ryan, who contributed. Let's cycle through a few more of these images. These are some of the images from Duet Gallery mentioned earlier. Cool. So just to, I guess to wrap up then, yeah, so I guess kind of like Vicki has mentioned as well, aaDH's always been really proud of its being quite regionally diverse, the makeup of the trustees and the members. We never emphasize one city or region over another. And as an organization without a kind of physical location, like a gallery or an office, it's kind of even more interesting for this project, Storm Channels, to work alongside the ante room and connect to kind of physical space with active practitioners. And yeah, I guess lastly for me as well, Storm Channels was a really exciting project for aaDH to be a part of. Digital practice is always exciting in the way that it's sort of slippery and often difficult to define. And regularly digital arts, I find, is kind of associated with sort of cutting edge technology, or seems to go hand in hand with that, linked together by industry collaborations. Whereas Storm Channels was this opportunity to sort of celebrate an essentially fundamental network of artists and in spaces which they live. That are both difficult to define yet provide a dynamic result. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Much appreciated. I love so far how the digital is just a kind of conduit toward the physical. I love the physicality of all of these discussions and how the digital is being used to network physical places, in and around New Zealand. It's my pleasure now to introduce our fourth and final speaker, Maggie Buxton. I had the pleasure of meeting Maggie several weeks back when we started to work up the idea of an aaDH panel. She's a producer, facilitator, and consultant. Her international experience is in change facilitation, strategic development, and cross-boundary collaboration and innovation. She currently works with emerging technologies to support communities. Her PhD was in creative technologies at AUT, and she has an MSc in organizational development from Sheffield Business School. Today she'll speak on her technology-based creative practice around rejuvenating urban and suburban infrastructure, and that's both social and physical. Please welcome Maggie.
Kia ora, everybody. I'm just going to share the screen, and if I can get someone to just let me know that you can see that.
No,
Do I have?
It hasn't come through yet.
Okay. Just producers, are we seeing something there?
Now, sometimes it takes a minute, so hit share screen and wait a few seconds on share screen on Zoom, and then we'll wait a few seconds for it.
Share screen, trying again. Are we seeing it now?
Yes.
So you
Great.
can-
Success. Okay, so my practice is fundamentally place-based. At the moment, I'm based in Taukaea, which is the northern part of New Zealand, Aotearoa. And so I have, since I was very small, had a strong connection to land, and have many years, as you've heard, had a background in community strategic, I guess, systemic development. So I work in systems to analyze them, to see how conflict works, to facilitate how things work together. So I'm kind of someone who works across different kinds of entities or ecologies. And I guess in the last 15 years, that has involved different kinds of technologies. And one of the reasons that I joined aaDH to begin with was around kind of that intersection between humanities subjects, which is one of my backgrounds, and the digital. So I guess Ada is I see Ada as a close partner or somewhere I'd like to be working alongside digital humanities. And David, you and I have spoken a little bit more about that. There's a natural alignment. So this strange creature you see is in an alleyway in Papakura, where I used to live, and it's an augmented reality moth that flaps that you can see with a mobile phone. And it's one of a number of creatures that have emerged out of a parallel universe that is part of my company or practice called Awhi World that I do with my partner Kim. And essentially, I'm just giving you some examples of community and the digital, and then we'll loop it back to Ada. But essentially, it's interested in using technology, digital, creative technology particularly, as a vehicle to do place-based practice and to engage in a kind of spiritual quasi-creative practice. And so I see my practice as primarily place-based, primarily spiritual. It just so happens that one major aspect of it is in the digital area, I guess. I'm interested in the spirit of place. I want to give some examples of practice and then have some discussion, and then we'll see how we go. And I guess one of the things that I'm interested in is kind of a really progressive notion about how we consider community and how we think about digital and community in place. I think we're moving into an environment in our reality where we're engaging ubiquitously with technology and communities in such a way that those things blur together. And so the traditional boundaries between, oh, this is a place of spirit or a spiritual place versus this is a kind of profane object like the mobile are kind of blurring. And I guess that's one of the things I was interested in my PhD. And I think all of us have touched on that idea of how do we engage in an ecological way with practice without seeing those things as separate, to make our world better, to make ourselves better, to connect us more. This was a project I did very early on. It was involved digital VJing, which is like a kind of visual live mixing with geolocative technology and mobile devices on a wahitapu or sacred site. And I did that in collaboration with local Māori and a local marae. And I mixed and gathered a number of different content sources across disciplines. So everything from a local psychic to archival sources from the government through to photographic biological data that I received and had processed through scientific sources at the university. This happened to be an overlay between a letter of a child who had used the site in 1972 and a daisy that I had magnified with my phone using a hacked lens that I found. But I basically was interested in how different kinds of data from different kinds of epistemological sources come together to create new understandings of place, and then are represented using mobile devices, using geolocative sources. And when people stood around the site, how they could give back to the site energetically by reappreciating that data. So it was kind of like almost creating a new cycle on that location. This is a local marae where I did an augmented reality app with the marae to layer stories into that particular sacred site so that those stories could then rebuild or reinvigorate the marae and also build capacity around their own knowledge sharing. I'm doing some of this quite quickly, everyone, just so you can get a smattering of it, just a little bits and pieces. Another project was about place-based practice. It was working with deactivated sites or sites that are often tagged or the subject of crime. And I worked alongside the police association and the local business association to identify those, and then worked with local artists, local Māori, underground feminists, punk groups, contemporary poets to create creative works for each of these individual locations that you see marked with these squares, and then geolocated the sound in those spaces immersively. So when you walked along, you would hear a huge blast of immersive sound in these locations. And again, you could re-see or re-experience the sites in a different way and put positive energy into those locations energetically. And the same work was also at the same time created through these portals. You could go into a local site, hold up the iPhone over these different portals created by a Māori artist, and the sound would come through those same portals. So a lot of my work, or my practice, and I know aaDH is the same, we like working across analog and digital things, so that the reader, for example, ironically is in a physical form about digital art. And so a lot of my practice, I'll often do books or physical artifacts alongside digital practice, so that we're working in analog and digital. And that's an accessibility thing among many other reasons as well. And also just to kind of ground things in the real, in our everyday reality. Another work was a community work that was in a derelict water tower. We worked with a local council and various other creatives. And essentially what we did was drop an enormous long cord in there with an audio exciter, which turned the tower into one giant resonating chamber and put sensors around the bush. So you walked into the bush, you heard sounds come at you that were triggered, and you went up to the tower, and the tower whispered to you words from the community, which we gathered that were very appreciative and positive about the location. And so it was like, again, kind of feeding back something that was a loop that really positively enforced the site, and we came away with physical infrastructure changed as well as the perception of the site changed. We do a lot of projection mapping, augmenting sites with different graphics, getting people to change their perception of locations and communities. And we also do a lot of collaboration with schools to teach young children about how they can engage with technology in different ways. This is one of several projects we've done, and we have one going at the moment with primary schools, where we create augmented reality experiences, and they create or understand what the special places in their school are. They create content for that, and then they show new entrants into the school around that content, so they induct people into the space using technology that they're used to, but get them seeing the special sites that they love. So it's kind of a legacy project for older children. So it's kind of building community, but within the school practice, I guess. We are working on the online processes. This is a work we did last year for COVID that's still in train, we're still working, and it live captures data around COVID and creates a journey. But the objects that you see are found journeys where we've walked around a neighbourhood. So it brings objects, sort of data that's from Johns Hopkins in India, but actually the objects you're seeing are from physical walking around a community. So it's grounding those two things together energetically, how we live our everyday lives with what happens in the world. And we also, one of the other practices we have, and again, I guess this is a reason that I gravitated towards aaDH, because it's a thing we have in common, is that World or myself, I'm very interested in unusual suspects getting together. So we've done a series of innovation labs in empty and derelict sites, where unusual people who would normally gather in the town, like scientists or cultural leaders, etc., come together and create projects or have the opportunity to learn together, often with students around either technology or different subjects like sustainability. The next one of those will be in May next year around biology. We're doing a sort of bio-art innovation lab. But I think coming back to the aaDH process, our latest thing, as we said, is indeterminate infrastructures. And one of the things we're doing as part of that program is examining object and how communities practice and individual artists engage with particular objects in the digital, and seeing the object as a source of something we can interrogate and think about. We've done, for example, Motorola mobile phones. We've done something on Arduino. So it's thinking about objects and the nature of technology, but also the nature of community that forms around them. So that's kind of, I guess, a scan of my personal practice, but also how many of that themes in there align with, I think, Aotearoa digital arts. And from what I've heard in terms of digital humanities, there's a real clear link. And so I guess I'm interested in how we can build links both between the organisations, but also thinking about arts practice. And I guess one of the things I've noticed is that as someone who's now outside of academia, a sort of academic refugee, if you like, trying to find ways through aaDH, but also through forums like this, where practitioners can publish or disseminate their practice with one another and share ideas and build knowledge without it necessarily having to be a PBRF tick off or a university having to sign it off or having it be not accessible so much that everyday practitioners can't understand it and so forth. So how do we build platforms for building community within the digital humanities, arts practice, digital arts, cross-disciplinary practice communities as they intersect, so that we can all learn and build together outside of being performative in an academic sense. So that's kind of my quest at the moment, or my thinking. So that's me for now.
Thank you for that. And again, thank you for prompting some of the big questions between these two bodies of scholars and artists and thinkers. Is there anyone in the Zoom audience who wants to kick us off with a question for anyone on the panel? So if you do, just put your Zoom hand up, and I'll come back to you. But I will come all the way back to Birgit, because she's been there the longest now after having kicked us off. I don't know which of my questions to choose. I'll make a quick comment and then ask you a question. The 6 prints that you, this is the comment, the 6 prints that you displayed, aestheticizing those data sets, I think that could and should be the cover art for the next Digital Humanities conference, because it's exactly the kind of thing that you already have to do to some extent. When you present data, you have to tell a certain kind of story and to make it presentable, and this is information design, but there's also an aesthetics of data visualization, and I just think that was really beautiful and a really strong link between some of the data science people here and some of the artists before us today. You had a kind of, here's the question, you had an almost passing comment about the feminist origins of the work that you were doing. In my own teaching, when I teach the history of digital literature and hypertext theory and all this stuff, you can't teach that without teaching feminist appropriations of that technology and techno-feminism. I was happy to see someone use that in a panel, and it's not just me anymore. So that was very much intertwined and interwoven with the origins of that art. So the question is now localizing that. To what extent have you felt a strong feminist, techno-feminist, cyber-feminist, whatever we want to call it, in a specifically New Zealand context? Again, because you're sort of still coming from the outside looking in and arriving. So do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because I'm currently working on a project where I try to specifically work with female identifying collaborators, and it's quite interesting, because I always personally felt quite never fitting into any of those spaces, like not yet an artist fully, like wouldn't probably feel super comfortable in an art conference. I've been invited to like IT conferences with the typical kind of audience being more male dominated and a certain age group and a certain kind of expertise in the room. And then there's also the kind of like, natural sciencey conferences where I also feel like kind of part of it. So I feel like I have kind of those, data science kind of field. So it's all kind of very overlapping, and it's super interesting that sometimes you see the same people at those different conferences, which feels quite reassuring that that's not only me. And I feel like, especially in the ADA network, there are a lot of people, including a lot of women who kind of can wear different hats at the same time. And I feel, I mean, you probably, once you're kind of in the technological space, I feel you can move into quite a lot of different directions, because in a way technology is quite kind of the suppressor, but like they all kind of make us use the same kind of binary terms, and we can kind of speak towards the same terms, if that makes sense. So I found definitely in my age group, and definitely in the younger students that I work with, I think it's quite normalized thing, quite a strong wahine growing out of those spaces. I think there's been a lot of work going on to manifest that. For me personally, it was, for example, having female teachers in undergrads who would teach technology. So it would just be something that I wouldn't second guess, oh, this is this is something odd one out. So I feel, hopefully my presence in those spaces and the presence of people like Vicki and Maggie, makes it kind of, but I feel, there's still a lot of work to do. Definitely.
Sure. Do any of the other panelists want to speak on that same thread?
Well, I would say from historically, there's been a strong weighting of women in the ADA network, and quite a few iterations of the board, there was perhaps only one man. So it was great to get a few more men into ADA. But I think I would like to pick up also on that whole, the cross-discipline thing. I think that it's something that quite a few a lot of people on the board of ADA and people that have been involved in ADA, but have that sort of being able to seamlessly move between. And of course, ADA was, the name Aotearoa Digital Artists was in reference to Ada Lovelace. So
absolutely, I love that.
Yeah.
Question for any of our other panelists? Let me continue to stoke that possibility, and I'll return to, this is a question that yokes probably Vicki and Maggie together, because Vicki spoke articulately about the development of Aotearoa Digital Arts Reader. And then Maggie spoke about the possibility of publishing venues that were outside of the debased rhetoric of output. So what would it take to get a Ada Reader 2.0?
I think certainly the will is there, and we've discussed it. And I think it'd be interesting to kind of look and take a snapshot now of where we see practice as it exists. I think even the term digital arts is actually, compared to even when the first reader went out, is actually a different kind of term. We're using more terms or different kinds of terms now than we did then. So certainly it's something that we've talked about as a board. And I think after the next stage after indeterminate infrastructures, we've got the symposium, we've got a series of workshops, we're launching a new website, we've got a bunch of things happening, but Vicki has a symposium, a large symposium next June. And then the stage beyond that, I think, is to start looking at more. We've got a number of publications coming out, but those are online publications, is to look at what do we do next in terms of that. And I mean, what it takes usually is funding. You know, let's be honest, there'll be some funding needed, but I think it's also just kind of making sure that when we do it, we really think through what's the new context that we're in, and what would a reader, if it was coming out now, be like. Certainly I would love to see it be a physical object, because I just love the irony of that. But, you know, there's stuff about the environment and various other things. But, you know, I do like the idea of having digital things recorded, physically recorded in some way, some tangible way, as well as being available online. Vicki, did you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, I would just like to point out that with the sort of revamping of the Korowiki into the art base, there was some commissioned writing, and I would also like to bat that along to Ted, who has been working currently with writers and the idea of more zine orientated, more DIY.
Kia ora, Vicki. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe firstly I'll just talk about the Ada Reader being such a formative text for me in my undergrad studies. And yeah, again, it's sort of at a time when there was no other literature around the subject, and it was kind of like a real beacon to focus that a lot of this discussion. Maybe I'll park any discussion of like zines or more smaller publishing for now, but just to recap that with our recent CNZ grant, we've kind of started commissioning new writing. So we've got some interesting articles coming up on NFTs, digital. It's all unpublished, so it's still a bit fresh, but yeah, there is sort of this sort of rolling nature to some upcoming writing, which we're really excited about, which will potentially create a new updated screenshot of digital arts practice in Aotearoa. So,
I'd just like to also finally say about the physical object is that one of the things about it, the physicality of it, I mean, it's a great publication. It's a really beautiful object, but also it includes photographs that are not articles, and it included in the end papers and all the way through it a series of colours which relate to the poisonous green of the Taranaki landscape, which was Raymond Turner's artwork. And she created a perfume as part of a residency for scans, and that was her work. So there are elements of the physical that actually only really exist in the physical as well. So, and I think that kind of really well sums up, like everyone has talked about that, you know, the tension between the digital only existing and the ephemera of wires and lights and dials, and the network and the connections and the, you know, the things that are generated that are really specifically physical, although they have digital technology in them.
Yeah, and circled back to the initial discussion around publications too. There are all these in-between type of publications. So what we're doing at this moment will be published on YouTube, which is a kind of sort of an in-between gesture to the kind of work and the kind of thinking that you as artists are doing. Speaking of artists, I know there's at least 3 in the Zoom audience, and I know that some of them have rich connections to the discussion that's already been had. Perhaps one of you might have a question for one of our panelists. I'm not being nasty, I know all of them, so. Let me go back to this other idea that I had, and I'll throw this out. Oh no, we do have Carolyn. Can you, would you like to ask the question live, please?
I'm just interested in what the panel, their views and feelings about the digital and the body, and the intersection of technology and the body, the whole body aspect of the body and art, I find is a really interesting topic, and you guys just sort of touched on it, on the physicality thing, and I'm wondering about tactile aspects, and if you have any further thoughts to expand on that particular discussion.
I mean, I can have a quick go at that from my practice, Carolyn. Sort of the physical body and how it relates to the digital feels like it's almost like a parallel conference, right? Because everyone will come out at somatics in every other way. It can be to do with pattern movement, or it can be physical kind of augmentation. Like there's all sorts of ways one encounters body and digital. Or the other extreme, if it's not the physical body with augmentation or inserted, it's like, how do we represent the body in other spaces? And Vicki's probably one of the people who work in that area a lot more, like spaces where we engage or represent ourselves. I mean, for me, if I think about my practice, the body is kind of a medium from which I channel the digital. So I use this. We create an experience, and we experience that embodied And if, for example, I have an augmented reality experience using a phone, people are in their body engaging with the phone. They become the medium for experiencing that, and then that experience transfers back into the land. So then the land is appreciated through the body as a medium or as a channel for that digitality. But I think, you know, it feels like there's a whole discussion about the nature of those two things, and many continuums to be written about, or about the nature of body and fully digital or not, and avatar and the Turkle works of being in multiple places at once, etc. One of the other things we're working with right at the moment is wearables, because I guess in terms of the next layer of ubiquitous technology, it's not just carrying things, it's wearing things or having things inserted. But I don't want to go down that slope too much, otherwise we'll end up in 5G and chip territory. But I think certainly there's stuff about the digital that's current, that's even being debated about at the moment, right? That's kind of an interesting thought. All I can say is it's a great topic. We might want to close the rabbit hole for now, knowing it's kind of part of the discussion, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question and great response. So thanks for that. Does anyone else want to?
Well, I will pick up what Maggie said. One of my works is through an environment called Upstage, which is a performance venue, which is actually how I first met Birgit, and online while she was still in Europe. And a part of that is very much about the body and as a performer, and the digital just as the permeable screen, really, between the connection of the actor and the audience, or the storyteller and the receiver. But the other work would be the sounding, which is the echolocation and anthropogenic noise, and in which we got people to embody the size of the whale and to walk in a communal space under umbrellas, and so to share the experience of listening to whales and listening to whale scientists, and also experiencing that seeking of the invisible network of technology, or these Wi-Fi oceans, as we termed them. And I think that it is very hard to separate the digital from the digital that connects us personally. And I think that a lot of people's practice really is about that as well. The digital is just a very useful tool, and especially in this country, as we are quite small, and a lot of practitioners distributed from each other, and in the situation we are currently, where people can't travel all over the place in order to work together and to create together. I have relationships with people that I've worked with creatively for a very long time now, and I've never actually been in physical space with them. And so I think that it's very much an embodied practice, and at that point where we're all slightly leaning towards our screens, we're inhabiting quite a physical, ephemeral space together.
Yeah, and it's probably worth mentioning the artist group that Vicki formed with several others probably nearly 20 years ago was actually called Avatar Body Collision.
Yeah.
So you have these two entities and these two concepts in collision, in contact, and you will hear a little bit more about Upstage in the next panel that I'm on. It'll get a mention. Are there any other virtual hands that wish to show themselves? So let me go back to a comment that Maggie made as well, and I partly answered it in my own head after listening to Carolyn's question, which was lovely. But the tension between the spiritual or the sacred and the profane. So that struck me quite a lot, and I started to think of examples. I started to think of the panel that my wonderful students did the other day, and Ursula's paper was on ritual and games, and taking something that our parents probably thought was profane years ago, and talking about ritualistic or spiritual experiences that could be had through gameplay. I think I'll be framing the web itself as our combination between those two things. But what other examples or what other tensions might we locate around this idea of the sacred and profane? We could take this from a cultural angle as well. There's questions of cultural context that Maggie's mentioned, as well as using different technologies going into very traditional environments. So I'll throw that open to you. The tension between the spiritual and the profane that seems to be blurring. I'm ending with a hard one.
I mean, I think the first thing as a disclaimer is that coming as a Pākehā to the topic, I'm collaborating, for example, with Indigenous people in New Zealand, Māori, and many of the projects I did with them were in partnership or collaboration with them. But certainly I'm coming from a worldview where as a Pākehā, I'm collaborating into those environments. So in some environments, we can discuss and we can debate the nature of sacred and profane and talk about the blurring. In other environments, there isn't a blurring. It's very clear what the sacred and profane are, and it's not really our place to debate that in a certain sense because it's culturally specific. So I can only talk from my perspective. We can only ever talk from our perspective and with all the cultural stuff and layers of privilege that go with it. Certainly it's challenging when you think about the notion in an environment where it used to be very clearly demarcated what was a sacred spot and what wasn't. If you walk through a church door versus a pub door, for example, in Western Pākehā notions. And often the way that we define profane is something, or sacred as a set aside space. So something that's set aside from the everyday, essentially. But what happens, I guess, in a world where at any given minute we can't escape signal, that we're always within the realm of a signal, we're always in the realm of something being recorded or within a satellite's range or within some other thing which is unseeable, being able to permeate our bodies, Carolyn, and going back to that discussion. What do we do in that environment when we say, well, this was made by Samsung, and this water over here was made in this environment? What do we say? How do we clearly still demarcate that when, for example, we're listening to sacred chants on a MP3 player, or when we're having a Buddhist meditation session on Zoom? Like, do we say that that's not quite right because it's not on the right vehicle, we have to do it in person? I think some of those, it's not saying that there's a blurring, but I think there's a questioning around some of those notions in the same way that most polarized notions of anything are being questioned at the present time.
Sure.
So I think that's what I want to say, with the disclaimer that we can question as much as we like, but there are challenges in other societies where they feel corrupted by the very fact we're having this discussion, and actually there's very clear understandings of what is considered sacred in their environment and what aren't.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to the Ada reader, it's extremely clear that the closer we look, at least in the context of New Zealand, much of the Indigenous participation and adoption of these new media technologies would run counter to the classic hegemonic narratives of media encounter that we tend to think of when an Indigenous group comes into contact with something new. and I'm going to be speaking about that a little bit in my paper in the next stream, but we had Bridie speaking with examples from Rachel Rakina's work, from the start. So I think, at least from my sites, digital arts, and I hope increasingly so digital literature is well placed because of that strong Indigenous undercurrent from the start, that strong feminist ethic from the start, and a strong inclusionary ethic, and a real ethic of care in terms of the land, in terms of the environment, and in terms of place. So we'll end on that optimistic note, I think, and everybody can take a break in terms of people who are going to make it to the 4 o'clock stream. You have 3 choices. This is the penultimate session of the conference, but please, in your own way, muted applause, virtual clapping, however you want to do it, Buddhist chanting, please join me in thanking our 4 panelists, and may it be the first of many more ADA panels to come. So thank you, guys.
Thank you for the invitation, Dave.
Yeah,
Really
thanks,
appreciate it.
David.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you.
very much.
Take care, and we'll see you around.